evening, everyone, and thank you for joining. My name is Vuyo Fuchane. I am the Deputy Director at Workers' World Media Productions, and I'm honored to be moderating this discussion tonight on the draft paper on human settlements. I hope you're all doing well and ready to have a meaningful conversation. So tonight we will discuss the draft human settlements white paper, which has been published also for public comment and is a review of the 1994 housing white paper. So while the paper acknowledges the achievements that have been made since 1994, it also highlights some of the significant work that remains. So this discussion is quite a valuable opportunity for us to understand some of the nuances of the white paper and also Paul's review of the white paper, which I hope some of you have also had a look at, and its implications. And I think it's particularly important for the commentary and the discussions we'll be having today, particularly at this, current political juncture that we find ourselves in as a country.
I think that they would have to be reblocked in some way. And the question I'm asking is, what can a design process that is trying to secure rights for development and secure tenure, and I bow down to all of the participatory and other things that have been shared, but I'm asking, here's an opportunity to shift the lives of 6,500 households that we're addressing right now, because we can't work on other sites because they belong to other institutions, or even 4,000 is actually what it's boiling down to. What can we do with sites that might be no more than 35 to 40 square meters that provides services, fireproofing, a roof over people's head, and a woman doesn't get killed because she's going to the toilet at night and has to walk a long distance to go to a toilet? Those are the basic conditions, and the kind of sharing of toilets is an unspeakable ratio of 40-1 or whatever. And so the unspeakable conditions still. What are we going to do? I feel like globally, the poor have been sold out. Our system is not serving them. We are stuck as stuck can be. What are we going to do?
Quite a pertinent question, I think. And I think it's really interesting that you've sort of shared some of the alternatives that you've been involved in terms of the provision of housing and structures and shelters. So before I hand over back to my panelists, are there any other reflections from the floor? All right, going once, going twice. So I just think maybe just to, as you reflect, your concluding reflections and remarks to my panelists, maybe you can also just touch a bit on the question that Geeta has raised just now, and then provide us with your roundup. So I will start with you, Paul.
Yes. I've been just listening and noting all the inputs, but I think the Geeta's input right at the end is quite a important sort of grounding point, and it also speaks to the desperation on the ground and the lack of an appropriate strategy, never even mind an appropriate strategy, the lack of a willingness, at the various levels of governance, of authorities to deal with this. Part of it is in the context of austerity and not making the budgets available. Part of it is this whole ideology of entrepreneurialism, where people in the governmental authorities are very focused. I haven't spoken about this in my piece, on something called good governance, And if you look at the strong parts content of the draft housing white paper, you'll see a good example of that, which I unpacked in my longer analysis. It goes into all the laws and all the regulations and all the policy documents. You know, people have often said we've got these great policies, but we don't implement them. Well, part of the problem why you don't implement them is that you're so focused on good governance that you never get out of your good governance echo chamber. So what am I saying? I think you know, what can be done? People do things in these communities themselves, okay, where they have agency. It sounds like many people in the Philippi example have very limited agency, but two examples that just come to mind. One outside, not far from me in Stellenbosch, where I live, where people invaded some private land. It was a good few years ago, and they had something like 200 new informal structures of shiny tin metal erected within a week. That's a rate of delivery that is very, very focused on need, and it shows a high level of delivery organization and strategizing by land invaders. And eventually, the municipality bought the land from the private owner and put in services. So, yeah, for me, that was an example of people outside the system forcing their way in to do the best that they could without romanticizing the living conditions that they have. And the other example relates to food. The Philippi Horticultural Association, who I've had a bit of contact with, comes to mind because food security is part of the human settlement story also, and the Kolobeni organic gardeners in the eastern part of the country who successfully resisted the ANC supported sort of attempt to do strip mining, to the point I heard this personally from somebody who gave a talk at the Philippi Horticultural Association a few years ago, to the extent where these people warned Gwede Mantashe and company not to come and visit and to with the mining company, I think it's an Australian one, as part of getting that process going, because they would be met with force of arms. And I'm not glorifying people taking to arms or violence, but that struck me as taking power and using a situation, and they back down, the Department of Mineral Affairs. So it seems to me there are examples where people take action and where they the circumstances maybe favor them in the way they don't in Philippi. Let me leave it at that.
Thank you, Paul. I won't repeat anything. Nomzamo, over to you.
Thanks so much, Vuyo, and thanks to Gita and Yolanda. I think for me, it's that the question about how do we remain hopeful. I think in the white paper there's a reference to passive beneficiaries, and I think it's really important to hear these examples of people who've taken up responsibility over their own lives and are making a difference and are producing their own habitats. And I think it's also important as we sit here as practitioners to also try and find alliances across different expertise, across different fields, to make sure that we're able to support these attempts. That's what I can offer, unfortunately, to Gita. And I was quite grateful. I took some copious notes in both from both inputs about what is happening. And I think, for instance, I live in Johannesburg, and one of the challenges that we're dealing with at the moment is the fact that we are fearful of a response from the state, which will seek to kind of evict people en masse out of the Johannesburg inner city. And so to kind of listen to hear what people can do on their own while they convince our governments, while they're able to quote them on, you are already part of this global action plan on upgrading on informal settlements. Shouldn't you be treating us in this way? Shouldn't you be getting involved in this way? And using whatever tools we have available to us to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Kashifa, the last word is yours.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I want to say to the comrade, you know what? I think we as different movements, we need to speak to each other also, because I know collaboration works very well when we speak to each other, you know, then we can say this is something that we need to filter out through other areas as well. Because, you know, when they see something is happening here, let's try and move it to other areas if it works properly in those areas. Because I think people are tired of waiting on government, not coming back, keeping people ransom. Because you know what we see within communities, the construction mafias is taking over big time within our communities. And communities are facing the brunt of this construction mafias. But the other thing that I want to say that, you know, when it comes to our communities, we want our government to be transparent. There should be accountability and resource. You know, when the resources are being sent back to national, there should be question asked. Communities should know these things before monies are sent back. Because, you know, when monies are sent back, communities are waiting, when are our things happening? And that is one of the things that we are struggling with, because that was in the IDP plan, but what is happening now? So it's like our communities are afterthought to these politicians. And then I also want to say, you know, these vacant buildings, why can't these vacant buildings be utilized for our communities? It's standing there vacant for many years. As soon as people occupy, all of a sudden there's something that needs to be done. And you can see some of the buildings are being run down deliberately so they can be sold off for a cheap amount of money for these developers to fix up and to make profit on that, because that is what we are seeing. I want to say also, comrade spoke about the food security. When there's upgrading in communities and houses being built, because, you know, our houses are so small when they build these RDP houses, even these structures that they put up, there's not even enough space to have a small garden, because in our communities, our people is going hungry. If there's enough space that you can utilize, you know, at least there will be something for you to eat. So that should also be considered. And the last thing I want to say also, it's the safety and the violence within our community. You know, even as movements, when we move around, we are also not safe moving around in some of the occupations, and not just the occupations, in the different housing areas that we are working with. Resource is also a huge trouble for us, because moving around in the community, it's not safe also, because you are faced with so many challenges. And you know, when you see the city's officials is coming to the area, you will find that they're coming with a whole law enforcement. But we are the ones working there. You have to duck and dive when you work in these areas. So we are faced with all these challenges, but you know, we're not giving up. We continue with the struggle, because we know our community is very important to us. And we believe that, you know, we need to fight these injustices with our community, and we need to walk with them on this journey. And I think we need the lawyers like the series and the NUs who can help with us. You know, that ground, we want the grounded lawyers who can help our communities, because some of our communities goes to court, and in the side room discussions is happening also. So the resource is sometimes a really good, a big challenge for us as an organization also to do our work. But thanks for the opportunity, comrades.
Thank you so much, Kashifa. I wish I could adequately summarize all of all of the inputs from tonight, but I think some highlights are the critical role of community agency, recognizing that it does exist, and building ways in which we can collaborate across communities, across organizations, and as practitioners, and also just, really, really honing in on alternative and some of and engaging with cross-sector collaboration with these alternatives that we can bring forward. There was a big call for transparency and advocacy around how resources are spent, ways in which we can mitigate some austerity measures, avoid them, and for our governments to be answerable to the provision of housing and shelter, which is a fundamental human right. Yeah, and just integrating some of these approaches, which are sustainable, equitable, and I think really, just to reiterate Nomzamo and Kashifa's points about remaining hopeful, because even as we are critical and we are analyzing and we are pointing out issues as we should, it's important for us not to lose sight of hope. So I think that's what I am personally taking away from this discussion, amongst many other things. But I think remaining hopeful and building solidarity, I think really is key in the work that we all do. So yeah, I think that's it for tonight. We are just 5 minutes shy of the 90 minutes I had asked for initially. And just to also say that I'm very, very thankful for everybody who joined this conversation as listeners, as contributors. We really are appreciative for this discussion. And just, as I conclude, to encourage everyone to continue engaging with this process, because as it's been mentioned, the lack of consultation that is often involved in these processes. So it's quite important to have our voice in shaping, future iterations of this white paper. So that's it for me. And thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, have a great evening. Stay
Thank you,
warm.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you.